Welcome back, everyone. My name is Carrie Connell. I'm an advisor at HTG Investment Advisors, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Allison Donaldson, who you've met in previous webinars if you've attended one, and Bianca Schumann, who we asked to join us today because she has younger kids, and we thought it'd be good to include her in the discussion. This is the fifth and final installment of our Financial Fitness Bootcamp series for women. And this seminar is going to be about building healthy financial habits for your kids. And today's webinar is going to be formatted slightly differently. We'll be hosting this webinar as a panel discussion where the three of us will be discussing ideas and ways to have an open and gentle conversations about money with your children at any age and to help them pave the way for sort of greater financial independence as adults. As we've mentioned in previous weeks, our firm is passionate about educating our clients and the community to ultimately lead to greater peace of mind when it comes to your financial future. In week one, I started us off with tips to get your financial house in order, including gathering and organizing your information about your assets and liabilities, your income and expenses. And we touched on the importance of having an estate plan, being appropriately insured, and protecting your credit. In week two, Allison focused on the importance of setting financial goals and how to create a plan to achieve them and demonstrate the impact of today's decisions on tomorrow's goals. She also highlighted tips and tricks to optimize your savings. In week three, I outlined the different ways to save for those goals to maximize flexibility and minimize taxes. And last week, we discussed investing. When is it appropriate to invest and how to invest? The goal of today's webinar is kind of to go back to the beginning and discuss ways to teach the philosophies and principles we discussed in the last few weeks to our children, so that by the time they're adults, they have the tools and knowledge necessary to be financially responsible. We'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So while presenting the content, I'm going to be fielding questions through the chat feature in the bottom center of your screen. All questions are going to be anonymous, and I'm going to try to answer. We're going to try to answer them as we go, and hopefully include your comments and questions in our webinar.
Thank you, Carrie. Allison and Carrie, you guys joke about my millennial parenting, but this parenting thing is so hard. I keep trying to think about all the things I should be and have yet to be teaching my sons. When they were first born, I feel like I spent so much time thinking about my parenting approach. I just feel like every conversation we have with our kids could potentially ruin them for the rest of their lives, you know? When my family first moved to the suburbs, my oldest son started taking my phone and adding things he wanted to the Amazon cart. He had quickly figured out that when something broke or he wanted something, all he needed to do was hit a button on Amazon and the item would magically appear on our doorstep hours later. So I naturally started panicking about my oversight in teaching him about money. And when I started to think about how I wanted to approach the topic of money with my kids, the old adage came to mind: give someone a fish and you feed them for a day, teach someone to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. When my first son was born, I was truly alarmed by the fact that these kids do not come with a manual. What the heck? It's so overwhelming. First, to know how to keep them alive, and then to teach them all the things and how to do all the things they need to know. And as a financial advisor, I feel like it's my job to make sure I talk to my kids about money. It's such a big part of how the world works. But it's also such a hard topic to talk and teach them about, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing it in a thoughtful way. And as I started to look into when and how to begin talking to my kids about money, I was startled by a study I came across by the University of Cambridge that said that money habits typically form early in childhood and that children establish their attitudes towards spending by age 7. My husband and I knew we wanted to start talking and creating family values and with our kids and raising them with healthy money mindsets. And that was important to us, and we wanted to be on the same page. So we decided our goal was to be transparent and include them in money conversations when appropriate, so that they could at least be exposed to the decisions and conversations we were having about money. Carrie and Allison, how old were your kids when you first started talking to them about money topics? Spencer's already 4. Am I super behind?
It's never too late to start, even if you feel like you're behind. Kids as young as probably age 4 can have the capacity to decide when they want something. And anytime your child expresses, a desire for a toy or something they don't necessarily need, some candy or whatever, you can use the opportunity to discuss why you're not going to buy it, and sort of start a discussion about wants versus needs. But note that you can't always say, we just can't afford it, because kids see through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, and actually one of my earliest money memories is related to exactly that. I vividly remember my mom with 5-year-old me at the grocery store, and I wanted a box of sugar cereal. And of course, my mom recognized that this wasn't a need, it was a want. And actually in my family, we were only allowed to have sugar cereal on summer vacation. So this was really out of the ordinary that I was asking for it. But instead of just saying no, my mom pointed out to me that all of the sugar cereal was placed at my eye level in the grocery store shelves as a marketing tactic. And that little bit of information stayed with me and transferred to many other situations in life. And I was determined not to fall victim to tactics. And with my kids, probably one of the earliest things we did with them was return bottles and cans to the recycling center when they were little. This was also initiated by my mother. And they got to keep the money in their mason jar piggy banks. And then eventually we started donating that money to charity.
That's so perceptive of your mom and thoughtful that she started to include those conversations with you from an early age. I feel like it's so important for children to learn about frugality, budgeting, savings, debt, and charity from a young age. And Carrie and Allison, you have both been so helpful at sharing tools and tips that you used for your children. So I thought it would be really useful if I shared some of the ways I've begun to introduce my kids to money topics. And then I know I would love to hear some of the things you have both done with your teenagers and young adult children to continue those financial conversations through the years. Does that work?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. I we had a comment from somebody who was on the webinar that Allison, they received a holiday gift or Christmas gift each year, which was a wrapped box of sugar cereal.
I love that. I love that. So I wasn't the only one.
Perfect. Well, at every age, there are definitely things that you can do to start helping your children understand the concepts of earning, spending, saving, borrowing, and giving. We really believe that financial conversations should start early, occur regularly, and span your child's development through the years. Taking the mystery out of money can really help your children understand their worth, and no matter what the path they choose, that will stay with them for their lives. Even if you recognize the importance of starting this process early, though, I know it's so hard to know where to begin. So our goal is to provide everyone with some language and tools and resources to help develop your children's literacy and lay out a few simple steps to build the foundation for money moments at each age. Children can actually begin to understand how money is used as early as preschool, as long as they can see or touch it. And this is actually also around the time that they begin to learn the concept of delayed gratification. This has weirdly become more difficult these days to teach our kids as digital payment options and Amazon Prime become more popular. Everything seems so instantaneous and virtual. So, and I think the only place I've actually used money in front of my son is at the local bagel store. Other than that, I don't think he's seen physical money very often. And I hadn't really thought about the impact that would have on his ability to understand money. But when someone pointed that out to me, they recommended that I practice letting my son physically handle real bills and coins so that he could have that hands-on experience. So we bought him the Lakeshore Learning cash register and actually replaced the toy money with real money. And there's so many ways that you can use this tool, but the two things that we did was when we first gave him the cash register, we made up a game for him to buy his toys from us. And we assigned values to his toys and had him buy them back from us. And this was our way of introducing an association between how much money was required to purchase things that he wanted or needed. We also had him grab a few dollars from the register when we go to the grocery store so that he can make his own purchases and actually practice physically handling money and getting change. And this has been a really helpful way for him to see how money actually works in real life. And then the other tool that we use is 3 mason jars that we marked spend, save, and give. This was an easy, organized, and really interactive way for my kids to work with their cash and coins. These jars helped my kids figure out a system that promotes responsible spending, thoughtful saving, and begins to teach kids about the idea of giving in a way that they can see and understand. When we take my son to buy things at the grocery store, we also allow him to keep the change. So it's cute because he likes to come home and put the change in his give box, which and he loves the idea that once it gets full, he can give it to someone who actually needs it. He usually says he wants to give it to a mommy who doesn't have any money. And this way he sees his money build up over time and is learning to be generous in the process. Also, during our conversations about money, we have started to introduce the concepts of needs, wants, and wishes. This is a hard concept, but we've started to incorporate it in our conversations when we go to the mall. And for example, we'll say to him, is this Lego set a need, a want, or a wish? And it gives him a chance to really critically think about what category his considered purchase falls into. And it also gives us something to talk about as we aimlessly walk around the mall for hours on the weekends. Children at this age they base a fair amount of their learning on observing and repeating the behavior of adults around them. So we also started to be very mindful about the way we talked about our purchases and what we said and did when we took him to the store with us. The grocery store seems to be an integral part of this learning process for us, since it's the only place we seem to actually go to buy things these days. For instance, my husband and I have conversations at the grocery store where we compare the cost of 2 items and then decide which item makes the most sense to buy. And then we'll praise the other person's self-control when they decide not to buy something, let's say like an expensive dessert, for instance, and instead spend the money on a more practical purchase, which has helped my kids start to figure out what's important.
I would love to see my husband at the grocery store. But I agree that the grocery store is a great place to start teaching kids about money. For example, if kids express a desire to buy like store-bought cookies or something, actually something that my mother reinforced with us and we reinforce with our kids, we talk about how much it costs less to make cookies at home, and that you can do things for less at home, and then we'd continue the discussion with a baking opportunity. My mom's a big cookie baker.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as soon as the kids are able to understand numbers, what number is bigger or which number is smaller, you can start challenging them to compare the unit costs of different products at the grocery store. We used to do this all the time. It kept them busy while we were grocery shopping. And as long as they know how to find that orange unit cost sticker, they can try to find the lowest unit cost for a particular product. And this can, eventually lead to discussion about quality and price and why you might spend more on a product that seems the same to the kids.
Exactly. It's all about the grocery store or the mall. We've been using our trips to the mall also to try to model patience for Spencer whenever possible. So last weekend we were at the store, and I made a comment in front of my son, something like, "I'd really love to buy these shoes, but I'm gonna hold off because Dad and I are actually saving for a washing machine." Another thing that you could do with children this age is practice making long-term plans and then executing it. For example, let's say your son really wants a scooter. He has his eye on this new scooter. You could say something like, "I know you really want that scooter. Let's decide how much money to add to your save jar each week, and we can make a plan to buy it." Then actually make a plan and set aside a specific dollar amount each week towards this goal. Also, young kids are really visual, so it could help to make a chart with a picture of the item that they want, and then maybe put like check boxes on that piece of paper for them to check off each week as they work towards their goal. And then obviously once they finally reach their goal, give them a lot of praise and make them really excited for doing a good job in spending and saving all of their money. My hope is that by the time my kids are in kindergarten, after a couple of years of being introduced to how money works, they'll be able to start to earn an allowance. Earning an allowance seems like the easiest way to get kids on that spending, saving, giving bandwagon. And I've read that it's a powerful tool to make kids financially fit. It's such a hands-on way for them to practice making basic purchasing decisions and helps them learn to save and budget for things that they want. And instead of just giving them money each week, some kids will do chores to earn that allowance or have a responsibility around the house. And those chores can help your kid to learn to take pride in their work and gain self-respect and confidence and competence by being held accountable for various tasks around the house. I do want to point out, though, that some experts argue that you shouldn't tie allowance to doing chores and that kids should just help out with chores because they're part of the family. But every family has a different approach, and you really need to figure out what works best for your family. In any event, though, young kids want to be helpful, so you may as well take advantage of it while it lasts. But as kids grow up in an increasingly digital age, I think it's important to get back to the basics when it comes to money. So so making sure that they're physically handling bills and coins and exchanging their cash for items they buy and counting their change. I really think that's a valuable experience, and they'll get more of a sense of what it feels like when their cash is spent and it's literally gone forever. So I think it's really helpful to get that hands-on, sorting, counting, differentiating that physical money in their bank accounts and their wallets. So just wanted to point that out. But how much do you give them? Before you set an amount, I would look at how much money your child spends in a week and what you expect them to spend their money on. That's usually a good starting point. Some people suggest giving $1 a week for each year and age. So if you're 5-year-old, if you have a 5-year-old, they would get $5 a week. But that might be a little insignificant these days, given all the inflation going on. The reality is, though, that any small amount of cash you give your kids gives them a chance to learn about spending, savings, and giving, all while the stakes are low and the mistakes they make won't be too costly. The other thing is it's helpful to provide their allowance in small denominations so that they can split it up however they want and start putting a portion of it into savings each week. And that's where those clear spend and save jars are going to come in, so that they can add money to one of the three as they get their allowance. Allison, what conversations did you have with your kids when you started giving them an allowance?
I guess around ages 6 or 7, we thought our twins were old enough to start pitching in around the house and they could earn a weekly allowance. I think we started with probably $5 a week and asked them how they wanted to pitch in. We helped them brainstorm on how they could help out, and some examples included like setting or clearing the table, washing dishes, cleaning their room, taking out the garbage. That was a big one. Feeding the dog, vacuuming. And then potentially we would pay them additional amount for sort of a more time intensive project like raking or cleaning out the garage or even babysitting their younger brother. And when we introduced allowances to the kids, we talked about what they can do with that money, and about putting some aside, setting aside a certain amount each week towards savings. And if they did that, we told them we would match any amount that they put in their save jars. And we did use the save, spend, give mason jars that Bianca mentioned earlier, which if you're matching their savings, that visually allows them to see how their money's growing, which is a really powerful concept. And it kind of creates more incentive for them to save along the way.
That makes so much sense. And it makes sense that allowing your children to see cash in these three silos of spend, save, and give would really set the stage for a lifetime of solid financial planning skills. Saving and spending are habits. So making savings a regular part of your children's earning habits from a young age will hopefully create a lifelong ritual that carries over into their adult life, and they just naturally put money into savings as they get real jobs.
And I do think, those frugality habits are that you demonstrate to your kids can really pay off. We always, pack snacks or lunches when we went to the park or for a hike or into the city, instead of spending money. And we talked about, the cost of buying lunch versus packing it with the kids, partly because they ate better when we packed stuff rather than buying it at a restaurant. And I noticed when the kids are in high school that, a lot of the kids at high school go into town for lunch, and the kids, we didn't give them money for that. They quickly decided that $15 was too much for them to spend for lunch. So they would go with their friends, they'd order a drink, and then they would come back to our house and make their own lunch before they went back to school. Helped that we were our house is close to school, but it's interesting that those habits stayed with them.
Yeah.
Smart kids. It's really reassuring to hear that you're actually seeing meaningful impacts from the lessons you're trying to instill in your kids. It really makes it worth the effort.
Only some of them, Bianca. You'll soon learn.
When we were speaking last week, you both mentioned that around the end of elementary school, middle school, beginning of middle school, after a few years of really handling money and saving it in a fun way, you both decided to take your children to the local bank and open their first youth savings account in their names. You both pointed out that it was helpful to physically go to the bank so that your kids saw there was an actual space where their money is housed, which is a really good suggestion because I think it helps reinforce the idea that money is real and doesn't just magically appear out of nowhere as it seems these days.
I think Bianca, sorry, someone mentioned the fact that their kids, their college age kids, had never written a check. So that's another opening up a checking account, a local checking account may be a way to sort of teach kids how to write checks to pay so they can pay rent when they get to college or whatever.
Yep, if checks are still around by then.
Online checking at least.
Obviously, though, if going to a local bank isn't an option, online banking can have just as much of an impact on children. As long as they can view their balances and deposits and withdrawals online. I know that Chase First, Go, Henry, and Greenlight are good debit card options for young kids because they're simple and they do allow kids to easily see everything online. Allison, you said you continue to manually transfer your kids' allowance to their bank accounts every week, right?
We did, yeah, right. We started giving them physical cash, and then as they grew older, we would eh, allow them to deposit it into their bank accounts.
Yeah. I mean, as your kids get older, allowance systems can change to fit your family and your kids' nature rather than adhering to some strict approach. But it is important that you're not to do the actual banking for your children so that they can continue to maintain ownership of their money and be involved in the process, I think. And then some families begin to give much larger allowances to their children around this age so that their children can be responsible for like their own clothing and food and entertainment. Again, this might only be a good fit for a more mature child, but they will ultimately gain a tremendous financial education from doing it. So if you think your child fits this group, it could be an interesting thing to try out. But a less extreme way of giving your child some money responsibility at this age is to give them a little bit of money at the beginning of a vacation to use on a souvenir. And our founder said to try to keep your personal judgment out of the decision because you really start to see their personalities come out when you do that.
Yeah, we did this a lot. We were traveling a lot when the kids were in elementary and middle school, and they were always trying to figure out how they'd spend their trip money and when to spend it. And one of my favorite moments was watching my son and a friend who we were traveling with try to buy these spinning tops at a market in Istanbul, in the Grand Bazaar, and they were just relentless negotiators. And that poor guy that they were negotiating with, I mean, they, you know, it's a great skill for them to have how to negotiate, and they ended up getting like 10 tops for the price of one. We had no need for 10 tops, but we did ultimately get them. So I think that elementary and middle school are really prime years for kids to learn about, you know, also not spending money on like the latest fad. When the kids were growing up, you know, when we were growing up, it was like Beanie Babies, and there were those rainbow loom bracelets and Pokemon cards, and kids get really caught up with it because everyone's buying them and they're showing them off at school. But you know, the kids spend a lot of your money and their money on that kind of fad. And so I talked to the kids a lot about sort of wants versus needs, buying things that will last past the latest fad. And I had a little bit of vindication. I forget which fad it was. I think it was these silicone bracelets that my son and I had a big argument about it. And then he came home one day and he's like, oh my God, nobody's wearing them anymore. It was like lasted 2 weeks, Mom. And so I was very happy about that. But also it's a good time to start teaching your children about how to be wise shoppers and sort of save for long-term goals. Whether it's evaluating similar products, comparing prices, or determining sort of which merchants are the most reliable, where you can buy the most reliable product, and also how to get the best deal.
I feel like it's a hard balance between wanting to like insert yourself and tell them what you've already learned and letting them kind of make those mistakes for themselves. I do think that having that independence is important in the learning, in the money management process when you're learning, because I think it's unlikely your child will overspend more than once. And it's such a valuable experience to feel that feeling of spending all of your money. And this is such a low stakes time that it's a good time for them to learn the lesson. And actually the other day we were talking to one of our colleagues, and her daughter was a lifeguard during the summer, and she'd put a percentage of her earnings into her savings account from each of her paychecks, and then she would use that money all year. And she started to run out around like April or May, and she was so upset. And she emphatically told our colleague that she would never let this happen again. She did not like the feeling of spending all of her money. So that was probably a real winning parenting moment for her.
And Bianca, one of the attendees mentioned that their parents made them, or basically all the siblings had jobs, and they had to set aside money to pay for each of their tickets to the family trip to Bermuda, and how much she hated it at the time, but that really appreciated the lessons their parents were trying to impart on them now in retrospect.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that her parents enforced that, because it's so hard to give it. It's so easy to give in, I think, when your kids are struggling with that stuff, but really important lesson. Also, if or when they do end up overspending, it could be a good time to consider giving your child a loan so that they could learn about the basics of borrowing money and paying interest on it. Just a thought. But on a fun note, some good ways to teach your middle schoolers about the value of money is to maybe play a game of Monopoly or Payday with them. That could also help set the stage.
And I think you're going to talk later about books. My favorite picture of my son is sitting on a beach in Dubai with a book that said it was a British sort of nonfiction book, and it was called Show Me the Money. And it's him sitting at this like luxury beach resort reading about Show Me the Money at probably age 8.
Oh, that's great. We should have included that picture in our slideshow. As your children approach their teen years, I'm assuming that their responsibility for managing their money naturally increases. And maybe it could be a good time to begin to explain family finances with them. But that doesn't mean you have to reveal like how much money you earn or the details of your investments, right, Allison and Carrie? What type of financial decisions and discussions did you begin to include your children in as they got older?
Yeah, I think that's right. You don't need to share all of the details with your children, but allowing them to participate in the family's financial discussions to some extent can be really useful and helpful. For example, you could involve them in smaller financial decisions like where the family is going to spend their next vacation, or which charities to contribute, or if we had to cut back on expenses, where would you cut back on expenses? How can we save more? Simple things like if you're planning a party, help them weigh they're planning a party, help them weigh the pros and cons of the costs of different venues, what's included, what's a la carte, to help them start to think critically about spending decisions.
Yeah, we continue talking to the kids about sort of what we valued as a family and how our spending reflected those values. We decided as a family that travel was more important to us and so we're all driving, Subarus and Toyotas, which are fine, but not as nice as a nicer car. When we travel, much to the kids' chagrin, we're not staying in the nicest or most fancy hotels. But as we point out, we'd rather stay at a okay hotel and spend most of our time out traveling and travel more. And in terms of your question, Bianca, about, talking about real specifics with your children, you also have to understand that they're not living in a box, especially with the internet, and they can go on Zillow at any time and find out how much their friend's house cost and even how much your house costs us. And so even though you don't have to get into specifics with your conversation, you can start talking about, different careers, how much people earn in different careers, how much education and experience is required to earn that much money. And you can also start talking about how different families have different priorities in terms of how they spend, earn, and play.
Yeah, and one of those priorities might be college. We started talking to our kids about paying for college around this age, end of middle school, beginning of high school. Because I think unless you talk about it, I don't think kids truly understand the cost of college or the ways to pay for it. We set up 529 savings plans for each of our kids when they were young. And we had made contributions to them over the years, but we were relatively sure we wouldn't be able to save the entire cost of college. So then the discussion became, well, how do we account for the shortfall? You know, how likely was it that they were going to get a scholarship? Not very. Would they choose a school which offered them more financial aid? Would they potentially get a job to help pay for it? And ultimately they settled on a school that gave them more financial aid than others. And we as parents covered tuition, room and board, and then they were responsible for everything else: books, entertainment, travel, and that was their skin in the game.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever too early to sort of start talking about paying for college, particularly because as the costs grow astronomically, I think, you really need to start and the kids enter high school talking about the overall cost of college, and sort of setting the stage for how you as a family plan to pay for college. And this is a really difficult conversation to have with your children. Some people just don't do it until senior year when it's kind of too late. It's a little bit better to sort of talk about the astronomical cost of college and what resources you have set aside as a family to pay for it, so that the kids can kind of plan ahead. And maybe they focus their search on, if you don't have the ability to pay for or don't want to pay for their college education, maybe they focus their search on schools with large merit budgets, or to decide to, if they have 529s, maybe they save that money and go to a state school and use it to pay for graduate school. Maybe they start getting a job a little bit earlier in high school and start setting aside money for college spending money. So in other words, save more earlier so that they have more resource when they get to college. But as kids grow, they really should become part of the money conversation, and feel the security of knowing that they're building a financial future for themselves, a financial foundation for their future.
That makes so much sense. And those are all really good. That's such good advice. It's such hard topics to navigate. And in conjunction with those 529 conversations, I feel like high school could also be a good time to start teaching your children the power of investing. Like you said, the sooner you start, the more your money will grow. So it could be helpful to explain to your children that investing means putting your money to work in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, in hope of making more money, and making sure that as goods and services become more expensive, you are able to keep up and maintain your spending power. And investing is the way to ensure that happens. And one way to get your kids involved in the investment discussion is parents can create a mock portfolio and put their kids' favorite companies in the portfolio to maybe pique their interest.
And I will say, Bianca, one thing that I did when I was little, and my son did as well, like in 8th or 9th grade, a lot of organizations will have stock market games where for a period of time, you kind of pick a portfolio of stocks in the beginning of the 1 month period, and then you track the stock's performance over a period of time, and then there's an assessment at the end as to whether or not your portfolio outperformed other portfolios. And so that's a free, easy way also to sort of mimic the same thing that you suggested.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've never heard of that, but that's a great alternative. And then when it comes to investing real money, parents can establish accounts for their kids on an investing platform like Earlybird, so they can slowly build their nest egg through the power of investing and time and compounding. These sites also allow friends and family to easily contribute to investment accounts. So for any milestone moment, it could be a helpful way to keep your children engaged in the account and limit the frivolous gifts that they don't necessarily need at that age.
Another attendee suggested that a lot of the high schools are now offering personal finance courses, and to really encourage your kids to consider taking one of those courses to kind of set the stage for later years.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I wish they had that when I was in school. I always talk about the lack of financial education in schools, and it's crazy because we come out and it's so important to have that knowledge, and not having it can be such a hindrance. When I was a teenager, I remember my parents doing a number of things to help me learn the value of money also. They let me do the family grocery shopping. I got a job at the neighborhood gym. I babysat and worked at a summer camp. And then my parents would do mock interviews with me to help me get jobs. And I think that's when I got my first credit card. My parents also I was really lucky and they got me a car. But the caveat was that I helped pay for it. And that's when they explained how insurance worked and the different kinds of insurance that existed. And they talked to me more realistically, like you said, about the cost of college, and specifically the ones that I was interested in, and strategies for getting in and paying for them. And I have not thought about what I will do for my own children when they get to this age, because it seems super far away. So Allison and Carrie, I would love if you could share some things that you did with your high schoolers to continue to build their financial foundations, in addition to what you've already mentioned.
Well, our kids got jobs as soccer referees back in like 7th and 8th grade. They were making, bank actually for an hour and a half of their time. And we basically said, they could keep a quarter of their earnings for spending money, but we encouraged them to put the balance into savings. And we also had them track how much money they earned each year, whether it was from being a soccer referee or a babysitter. Basically, we opened up Roth IRA retirement accounts for them. And we matched their earnings with a contribution to their Roth IRA each year as a holiday gift. And so that was sort of a way that for them to start saving for retirement, but not necessarily taking away their savings that they were also doing for, whether it's for college spending money or whatever. In high school, they both worked during the summers and babysat or did the soccer refereeing during the school year. And they've both contributed a portion of their earnings to a taxable and investment account that they invest along with me. I was surprised how much money my son earned during his gap year, and he probably gave me 3/4 of it to invest in the market. And they both have online access to those accounts, so they can track the growth of their Roth IRA and their investment and taxable accounts. And they've been pointing out to me recently that it's been going down. We've also tried to communicate sort of the value of work. Both my husband and I shifted careers at different points in our lives, and we try to share stories of what we enjoyed about our prior jobs and in the different jobs and professions, and what we learned from our experiences. Talking about work and what you can do is, I think, important for kids sort of setting the stage. And we also discuss the trade-offs between higher salaries and more free time to enjoy non-work activities, and kind of encourage them to consider that. I will say my son right now is focused on investment banking, so he's not listening, but I have high hopes. College, we're going to talk a little bit about college students and young adults. College students are forced to learn a lot about personal finance because it's the first time they have sort of away from home and actually paying for things. So make sure that they have the skills that they need. They're equipped with the skills they need to create a budget. If they're responsible for paying for entertainment or food, make sure they have a budget so that they can plan for the year. Try to encourage them not to incur any credit card debt. Maybe they start with a debit card, whether it's in high school or college, and work their way up to a credit card or use credit card only for special needs. And a lot of college kids are, forced off campus after the first or second year. And so they need to learn how to negotiate a lease, how to budget for utilities and incidentals, buying furniture for their new apartment, getting renter's insurance, learning the value of having renter's insurance. And they're also going to need to, pay the rent and cut a check every month on time. When I was in college, I lived with 3 other women my first year off campus, and I incurred a very difficult lesson when my roommates turned the heat up to 80, 85 for the first cold month in Boston. And we were all walking around in shorts and t-shirts like it was, we were out in the Bahamas. And we got our first bill, and the first heating bill was my entire budget for the year. It was really, create a lot of angst, and it really taught me a lesson quickly. And post-college kids need help understanding how to take advantage of company benefits. Their first job, they're going to figure out whether they have the ability to start saving for retirement with a 401k plan, for example. The studies have shown that starting to save for retirement, in your 20s is the best approach. It means, you have that compound interest for a much longer period of time. And it also sort of creates those saving habits, even if it's just a small amount, because they're not making much after all their spending needs. And they need to understand sort of the value of insurance. They might need renter's insurance if they're living in an apartment. Car insurance, they may be the first time they've been responsible for actually paying for that car insurance. And health insurance, understanding how health insurance works, and understanding whether they need to go in network or out of network. Those are big spending decisions that they probably have never faced before. So they need help from your parents. So take the opportunity to talk with them about your experiences, your successes, the mistakes you made. They can learn a lot from your mistakes. So I encourage any discussion that you can with your kids.
Yeah, we're going through this right now. My twins are 23 and starting life on their own. They have their first full-time jobs and navigating their company benefits and prioritizing their savings. So we've encouraged them to build an emergency fund, and we've talked to them about contributing to their 401k at least up to the amount to take full advantage of their employer match. And then setting up an automatic contribution to a Roth IRA. They both are earning less than the Roth IRA income limits, and it's just easier to build in a small contribution every month into their overall budget. So they're both doing that. And they've actually also found a lot of value in using a budgeting app. So one of them is using the budgeting function of HTG's planning portal, but really any budgeting app would do, and sort of talk to them about rules of thumb. We've encouraged them not to spend more than a third of their take-home pay on rent, and that sort of gives them a budget on how much they can spend on housing. And then they're on their own, they're figuring out what their utilities will run, and they're building out a whole budget, which is huge. And also I would say if you have kids in relationships, you want to advise them to observe how their partner approaches money and start talking about it. Start talking about money with your partner if you're in a committed relationship. And an easy way to start this conversation is to ask about their earliest money memory. All sorts of stories are going to come out of that, and you'll learn something about each other that way.
One of the attendees pointed out that a lot of financial advisors, I know we do this too, we talk to our clients' kids about money and help them kind of when they're starting out post-college, talk about, how they can start saving and the best way to do so. And I do think people talking about money is interesting. I always laugh and I think about how much debt I had when my husband married me, and he certainly should have asked a little bit more. Thankfully, he did not.
This has been such helpful advice and suggestions, and I'm having flashbacks to those really uncomfortable moments as a young adult when all of these new things are being thrown at you, and there's just so much to learn and start doing. And so this is really helpful, and I can't wait to implement them with my children and see the impact it has on their money habits over the years.
One of the other attendees just mentioned a new book that was recently released. We'll have to, I don't know if we've read, I don't think I've read it. It's by an author named Bobby Rebel, and it's called Launching Financial Grown-Ups: Live Your Richest Life by Helping Your Almost Adult Kids Become Everyday Money Smart. So it's definitely something we're going to look into.
Oh, that's awesome. And just so everyone knows, in the chat feature, we've uploaded a PDF form of additional reading resources for kids of all ages. So check that out in the chat feature. Everyone should be able to see it. We'll also include it in our follow-up email tomorrow. So if you can't see it in the chat feature, you can count on getting it via email. And just to sum up, we read this quote recently, which I think gives great perspective, but studies show that when kids learn how to work for money, they earn pride and self-respect. When they learn how to save money, they learn security and self-worth. And when they're encouraged to be generous with their money, kids learn to care about others. I just love all that. And hopefully we've given you some tools today in our webinar to help you along that way. But thanks to Bianca and Carrie for providing insight on this very important topic. I know all of our participants got something out of it and hopefully came away with new ideas on how to engage their kids or grandkids in talking about money in a healthy and productive way. So thank you all for participating. We can take a few questions if there are any, but tomorrow you'll receive a follow-up email with the recording, as well as the great recommended reading list. Some of it from Busy Bee Literacy, who curated some of the younger money conscious books. So look out for that. And we encourage you to share the information with friends and family. This is the last in our financial education series for women, but the content will live on through the recordings. And don't forget to check out additional material on the blog section of our website, www.htgadvisors.com. And certainly feel free to contact us with any follow-up questions.
Or if you have a recommendation for a webinar or a topic that you'd like to hear in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.